Greetings and God bless. Welcome to another episode of Pastor Mike, Dynamic Voices for a Diverse Church, powered by The Witness, a Black Christian collective. I'm your host, G. Tyler Burns. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at G. Tyler Burns. Please follow at your own risk. And joining me, as always, is the founder of The Witness. He has a very extensive bio. He is the man, the myth, the legend, the 6-time best-selling author, Mr. Blue Check Verified himself. You can follow his writings at jemartisby.substack.com. Dr. Jemar Tisby, what's going on, man?
Man, it's always good to be on the mic. I wish folks could hear what goes on behind the mic sometimes.
I do not.
But we're going to leave that for the people in the room. So.
Yeah, sometimes I'm like, yeah, I wish I could hear that. Other times I'm like, yeah, that's cutting room floor.
That's because mostly it's you doing the whiling out. But we'll leave that for another conversation.
We keep Bo, we got to keep him as our friend to make sure, just because you never know when there's going to be a moment.
Some receipts out
there's
there.
Receipts out there. You know, it's funny, Jay. I was thinking about this moment in the Christian expression in the American church. And I was thinking about really reflecting on how quickly things grew for us when we started a podcast.
Huh.
And when y'all started a podcast, it was in the middle of this big movement. And it was kind of multiple movements growing at the same time. So you had Christian hip hop that was exploding, specifically Reach Records and Lamp Mode and I mean, man, Humble Beast.
Wow,
and,
you are bringing me back.
Hey, man, it just exploded, right? And it was just this titanic, big, huge shift. It was like a tsunami of people. And then it was mainly like you got Lecrae. He was putting out albums like Anomaly and things that were charting number one on Billboard for like a certain period of time and everything. And so you had that. And at the same time, you had this movement called the Young Restless Reform movement.
Oh, I know it well.
Or what some people call cage stage Calvinists, right? And so some of y'all don't even know what that is, but the reform movement is how we started, right? Yeah, good for you. I'm glad you missed that era. But we all got a pass. We all got a testimony. So exactly. So these things were growing at the same time. And in the middle of it were people who were trying to merge the Blackness that's in CHH and then the theology that's in the reform movement and kind of bring it together. And that's where you get this interesting Venn diagram crossover sweet spot where the Witness was born, which was another name, right? Connected to that movement. So the Witness was born. A podcast was born, all these different things. And so now you look back on it, you're like, man, what a time.
What a time. You're making it feel epic. Like, okay.
It was, man. Well, you know, it was a moment.
Yeah.
It was a moment. You think about the thousands of people in a Pastor Mike Facebook group. You think about, the people that came to tours and conferences. You think about the crossover of different conferences and the conversations that were happening there, and then how the movements were filtering out. And there were so many different types of Black people together. And then you think about the Black church and how everybody was like, man, we done with the Black church. Forget the Black church because they not preaching right and they not teaching right. And then out of this seed comes this movement of people. But it's funny, man. I don't really think about Young, Restless, and Reformed anymore.
No. Yeah. It's shifted.
I don't really think about Christian hip hop like that anymore. Not saying I don't listen to it, but I just don't really think about it. It doesn't have the same impact and effect. But so much of that moment has shaped my own spiritual journey.
Yes.
And how quickly it grew. And then I'm thinking, man, isn't it funny how these fast growing movements shape the way we view God, the gospel, the church, ourselves, our own identity. And man, you think about it, we've got big movements. And big movements happened during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Think about like an Asbury revival, right?
Yeah, remember that? Yes.
Big movements. I think about in my city way back when I was growing up, the Brownsville revival, right? Big movement. Over 3 million people came and attended in 6 or 7 years. A service every night.
Unreal.
Now, how does that shape movements? And then I'm thinking about, man, it seems like there are big movements popping off today. And even something like 2819 that's going on. Some of y'all would know what that would be, right? 2819 exploding. One year they have 200 people. Next year have 6,000 people.
Goodness gracious.
You know, and I'm thinking about it. And I'm also thinking about the reality that sometimes, as great as these movements can be to shape us, they can also warp us. And I'm also thinking about sometimes when you're in a fast growing movement, it's almost like a current that's taking you that you can't, it's almost like a riptide. You can't get out of it. And you don't even know what's going on. You're just being carried along really quickly. And I told somebody recently, if I had to go back and do it over, being a part of Young Restless Reform, being a part of Christian hip hop, being a part of these fast growing movements, whatever they may be, and whatever sphere of Christianity I may have found myself in, I probably tell myself to watch out for a few things. Not just broadly, not just with people, but in my own heart. Does that make sense?
Interesting. There's a lot of layers here. So first of all, I actually had thought about writing some version of a book like Young Black Restless and Reform, because there was a current within the current of Black folks that we were part of with Reformed African American Network, as it was known back then, all the circles and organizations that we had relationships with. It was similar but different. And you're right, that current has seemed to move on. And I think partly because a lot of them weren't on the justice train, and or I'm talking about the white folks, cozied up to straight up racist.
Yeah, absolutely.
Douglas Wilson was deep in those circles. And I can go on and on about how harmful this man is and his theology and people in his circles, right? And
now the current Secretary of Defense attends a affiliated church with Douglas Wilson. So it's FYI.
I did a whole office hours on that thing. It's scary, y'all. It is the worst version of a hyper masculine, fundamentalist, sexist kind of
incredibly dangerous
religion. Anyway, there was that. It's really interesting in terms of like fast growing movements, because there's some legitimate need there, almost always. Yeah. Right. They're like it's speaking to a hunger in people. So whether it was Asbury, this is a college campus, and they're experiencing a revival. Young people wanting something powerful, transcendent to give their entire lives over to, wanting to see an authentic move of the Spirit and be part of that. Young, Restless, and Reformed. I would say, there's a lot of different ways to characterize it, but it was a hunger for deep, rich theological teaching. Right?
Okay, hang on. Now you doing an anatomy. You're doing an autopsy.
Okay, all right. Okay,
we got to go deeper on this.
All right,
let's slow it down a little bit, because I think this is important. So you take the Young, Restless, and Reform movement. What attracted us to being Young, Restless, and Reformed to begin with?
I know where you're going.
Well, I think for a lot of us, there was this idea that for me, I used to say it was doctrine. I was like, well, you know what? I've never heard sound doctrine like this.
That's what we said.
I've never heard somebody break down the scriptures like this. Now, truth be told, I grew up in church. My father's a pastor. I had heard people break down the scripture like that. I just hadn't heard it in the categories that it felt fresh and new. To categories I didn't grow up with. Mm-hmm. And so basically what I needed some clarity on, okay, how do I actually explain the gospel? How do I actually explain what I believe in? How do I actually clarify my theological stances?
Something systematic.
Something systematic, mm-hmm. right? We're like, oh my goodness, systematic theology, right? And so what do you automatically do? You automatically say, oh, well, everything I experienced before, that wasn't solid. That was emotionalism. That was hype. 'Cause I didn't even know what the gospel was until, you did. That's me. I'm speaking to me. I don't know about you, but I'm speaking to me. Man, I didn't even know what the gospel was back then. Yes, you did. Now these terms are striking you as appealing. And so I think for Young, Restless, Reformed, there was these categories. Now we can explain it better. Now we can systematize it. Now we can put it in pockets. And then all of a sudden now that makes it feel like, oh, this is the only legitimate movement.
Yes. That's the error, like we fell into. And I do think there's a value in sort of hearing it in a way that makes a cognitive, cerebral sense that maybe you didn't have before. Yeah. If everything's narrative, which is great, then there's probably a need for some system in there, and vice versa, right? So the folks who grow up with quote unquote reformed theology, systematic theology, could use some narrative, in their lives. I think the error was, like you were saying, we created this hierarchy. And for Black folks, what that meant was we put down the Black church.
Yes.
We put down Black preaching. We put down Black theology. And we may not have been as conscious about it, but that's how we acted. Certainly that's how I acted. I know that. Because who are the messengers too? That also matters. Because if we're getting the systematic theology, and by which I mean, yes, there's a specific discipline of systematic theology, which, by the way, MLK got his PhD in systematic theology. But what we're talking about here is categories, language kind of around theology that maybe we hadn't been exposed to before. And what we also have to acknowledge is a lot of times that was coming from white folks and European folks. And so there was this implicit racial superiority in the theology as well. And that's very harmful overall, but especially for Black folks who would then undervalue the Black church tradition and what it has been and what it has meant for us. So it's a bit of the autopsy there.
Okay. So that's Young Restless Reform. Let's take it to a modern movement. All right. So let's bring up something modern that maybe people would know, but we haven't necessarily dived deep into. Transformation Church.
Oh,
so let's talk about Mike Todd.
Here we go. Okay.
So it's interesting, right? So if people know, so part of that intersection for me, which some of you know, is I was in Azusa Pentecostal. So Bishop Carlton Pearson, founded the modern iteration of the Azusa movement, which was also a movement, maybe not as wide sweeping or as viral or as total in impact as some of these other movements that we're talking about, but definitely would probably have been bigger or as big at least as
Carlton Pearson one.
The Carlton Pearson as Young Restless Reform movement, things like that.
Because we could throw in the Azusa Street Revival itself from the 1906,
right? Which is another example.
Yeah.
But so Mike Todd came from that same stream, right? His mom was the head of intercession, and his parents were involved in that. And so I didn't know them personally, but we were all in the same youth explosion thing whenever we go to the big national conferences. And so now you have Mike Todd kind of comes out of nowhere, right? In Tulsa, Oklahoma. Comes from being a youth leader and producer, sound man, now to being head of Greenwood Christian Center, which is right near Black Wall Street historically. A majority Black church that's pastored by a white pastor, Bishop Gary McIntosh. And then all of a sudden now what happens then? He's thrust into the spotlight because he's able to amass young people. He's thrust into the spotlight and nobody knows who he is. I think now 10 years ago, right? Nobody knows who he is. And then he invests a whole bunch in cameras. When he invests a whole bunch of cameras, now he thinks ahead. He knows people are going to be wanting sermon series.
Wow.
And then all of a sudden, something he preaches gets shared by, I believe it was Selena Gomez or something like that. So he preaches relationship goals. It gets shared once by, I think it was Selena Gomez or somebody. And it's like, oh snap. Now it's viral. And then he becomes Mike Todd.
Yeah.
And so, if we're talking about, okay, what was the legitimate need there? So now, I think each generation needs pastors that it can at least identify with or have come from the same space. And so for a generation that had been talked over and had been talked down to, they were now being talked to as if they were legitimate, right? So there was this huge movement. And so now he's going viral. And if you think about it, man, he's preaching sermons. And while he's preaching during the pandemic live, there would be 50,000+ people watching live.
Bonkers. Yeah.
I mean, nuts, right? You could see just on one platform, you could see 50,000 people watching live. So there's a need for that. There was also a need for creatives to have a space because historically, even especially in the Black Pentecostal space, we haven't really had our creativity valued, our creativity celebrated. We haven't really had this for the nerds or the B-boys and the artists and the creatives and the people who are doing different things with the worshiping God in a different way. We haven't really had a space to be. So now it seems like, oh, there's this movement where I fit in. My creativity fits in. And so people latched onto it. And he's still very, very popular, right?
Big time.
Don't get me wrong. Like, he's still probably one of the most influential pastors in America today. But over the course of time, some things changed. And what's fascinating about Transformation Church is the thing that he did very well was he would do illustrations.
Oh, yes.
I mean, that's a gift. I want people to understand, as a pastor, the gift of being creative in the way you present with illustrations is not something all pastors natively have.
No.
Like, I do not have that innate gift to be able to come and pull out illustrations and show you that. It's more mental for me, right? But the gift of being creative and summarizing it. But as time elapsed, some of those illustrations got more and more pushing the edge.
I was just going to say.
Then they got more and more expensive. Then they got more and more, in some people's cases, wasteful. So you got this massive spread of food talking about gluttony or whatever. And you got this massive spread of food during a pandemic where people are struggling to make ends meet. So people are like, wait, what are you doing with this food? Like, you're like smashing this food and eating all this stuff or throwing it against the wall. And you're like, whoa, this is kind of wasteful, right? And then you get the spit, right?
Oh,
the spit
yes.
put
That's
on his
the
brother's
one we
face.
Talked about. Yeah.
So it's funny. The thing that you needed now turned into like the thing you focused on. And that thing now pushed people away from the faith rather than bringing them close to make them feel seen.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting how these movements grow, but how quickly people latch on to them.
So is that an issue with the preacher, if you will, the producer, or with the consumer?
Well, that's why we have the podcast, man. That's why. I'm asking you. I'm preaching every week. I'm asking you, what's the problem? Tell me, tell me how to prevent this. Because let me ask you this before we even get down to that. Is explosive growth a bad thing? I mean, you got 2819 now, 6,000 people plus, all these people tuning in, claiming to be digital disciples, connected, TikTok going viral every week, Facebook posts going viral. It feels like another big movement. And now looking back on it, doing an autopsy of movements I was a part of and things I fell prey to, I'm asking the question, is this type of explosive growth actually healthy in the life of the believer? Or is it just like, man, you know what? It happens sometimes. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it happens sometimes. And I think that's where we really need to focus on our own character, having a good circle of people around us to check us and speak wisdom into our lives. But like, this isn't the exact same because I'm not pastoring a congregation or anything like that. But, you know, my Substack is a top 5 Substack in the history category. Yeah. Like it's doing well. And that is primarily due to certain spikes in growth, explosive growth at certain moments. So for instance, after the 2024 presidential election, I wrote an article. It just blew up, you know? And there's a sense in which it's like, is this good? Like, is this like healthy growth? Are these people who are going to stick around? Are they here for the right reasons? There's all those things. But to me, whether it's preaching or writing or teaching or whatever field, if you're doing what you do and along comes growth, I think you're on solid footing at the beginning. You know what I mean? Like you haven't done anything out of character. And what happened was the context changed. The context is always shifting. If there's an election, if there's a pandemic, if there's a war, whatever it might be, that then gets to the legitimate need that we were speaking about. And guess what? There are faithful voices out there that in those particular moments, they get discovered, if you will, right? Now, I do think there's dangers. And I think there's particular dangers.
Okay, so let's take a break and then we're going to come back and talk about these dangers because I think we need to give maybe even ourselves, and I'm just going to use this as a personal advice session for like what I need to watch out for as a leader if one day that happens. Okay, so we'll be right back here at Pastor Mike. Well, greetings and God bless, family. This is your host of Pastor Mike, Tyler Burns, and I am so excited that we're still doing Pastor Mike 11 years after we started. Think about this. 11 years after we started, we're still doing this. And the reason why we can do it is because people like you have supported us from the beginning. We would not still be here if not for the support of people who are our patrons. And if you go to patreon.com/Pastor Mike, if this podcast has helped you in any way, shape, or form, if we've encouraged you to think more deeply about race and justice, if we've inspired you to make change right where you are, if we've been an oasis in the desert in the midst of toxic church spaces, we need your help. We need your support. For just a few dollars every single month, you can keep us going. You literally, as our listeners, keep us going. So head to patreon.com/Pastor Mike. We're passing the mic to you for your support so that we can continue doing this podcast that so many people love. Thank you so much for your support. If you are already a patron, and if you're not, just a few dollars a month. Thank you so much. So we've been talking about fast-growing movements, and you said there's some particular dangers. I think I can identify a few as well that are just things that I should have looked out for when I was participating in a movement. And I don't know if I think this is for everybody. So I'm not just calling out names to pick on people or anything like that. I'm just saying these are big inflection moments of growth in our recent church history. You know, whether it's Transformation Church, Young Restless Reform, 2819, Mars Hill, you know, the rise and fall of Mars Hill, Mark Driscoll, right? So I think I can identify. So if someone's like, man, I'm swept up in this movement and it's booming, how would you encourage them? Yet also say, you may want to watch out for a couple of things. You may want to be aware of certain things in your heart when movements are exploding.
Encourage them in the sense of, if you are being faithful to your calling as best you know how, which is all any of us can do, and growth comes, welcome it as a grace. Welcome it as the fruit of faithfulness. You know, sometimes we labor in obscurity. Oftentimes, probably, is more the default and the norm, but sometimes not. And that doesn't mean you did something wrong. You were pandering to an audience. You changed your message or watered anything down. Yeah. Maybe it's exactly what people need. And you are the person, for whatever reason, who's experiencing that growth and attention. Steward it well.
And the one thing I would say as well to that point is a lot of the pastors of fast growing movements or people who get thrown into the spotlight, they have been in obscurity for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
And have just been consistent. And at the right moment, things just tend to just explode, whether it was what they desired, what they planned for, what they strategized for, or honestly, it just what we like to call the Spirit of God breathed on it, and it just like blew up. It was at the right moment. The algorithm hit plus the Spirit of God, and now all of a sudden it's big. So yeah.
And another word of encouragement is you're not responsible for what brings people or keeps people there. In the sense of, people have their own agency and their own moral responsibility. And we have to, as believers, as people of faith, gravitating towards certain people, examine our own motives. There's a temptation in all of us to want to be associated with the new hot thing.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, we can see this all over. I can think of examples in particular of Black Christians who, how do they identify themselves? They name their local church and they name their pastor. You know, because they know that if they drop certain names, that carries weight, and they want to be associated. I think that's a human thing.
For sure.
But that's not necessarily a healthy thing, right? And so by way of encouragement to the leaders, to the speakers, to the preachers, you're not completely responsible for people's motives in what they're bringing to
That's good.
Why they come to you, right? What you are responsible for are your motives, and your faithfulness to the call.
That's good.
And that's really all you can control.
That's good. I think another encouragement I would give is, you know, when people desire more of God, or when people desire a better relationship with God, a better ability to walk with God, that is a beautiful thing to desire. And I encourage people's hunger and thirst, right? Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, or, you know, maybe if you're reading the original language, those who hunger and thirst for justice,
there we go.
They shall be filled.
Drop that in there.
I mean, hey, but you can do your Googles and your searches. But I think if you are hungry and thirsty for the right things, I think that is healthy. And I think as an encouragement, whenever there is a budding movement and a growing movement, you find lifelong friends if you steward it right. Like this podcast is a direct result of some of these movements kind of intersecting. And so that's a beautiful thing. That's an encouragement. Find your people. Like find people that can not just walk with you in the moment, but that can grow with you and develop with you. And that's a beautiful thing. So those are encouragements we would give, but there are also pitfalls, dangers.
Yes. But let me throw this wrench in. Do you think this skepticism of growth is part of or a symptom of a scarcity mentality? So I want to say we have this almost reflexive.
We have a couch over here. Can I sit down on it?
We have this.
I'm going to reflect on the therapy couch right now.
I'm just wondering if we've so conditioned ourselves to a state of lack, of struggle, of not having, that when growth comes, it's like, oh, this has to be bad. This has to be something negative, warning sign.
I think that may be part of it for me personally. I think, we were forced to go to 2 services just because we couldn't have it. We had no more parking spaces.
Okay.
And like people were parking on the side, and we don't have a huge building. So I don't say that as like, oh man, we're killing it, but glory to God. No, like we're in a small building. And it was a lot of, parking spaces. And then the church that was actually behind us banned us from parking in their space. And they don't even use that parking lot, but it was a wild thing. We need to talk about boomer black pastors and how they, anyway. But so it was very interesting. And so we went to 2 services, and I remember I couldn't sleep the night before. It was a quick decision because we just were boxed in. So it was only a week's notice.
Ugh.
So I was like, oh, okay. And then when people showed up to both services, I was like, what do we do now? And, my wife was like, what do you mean? I was like, I didn't expect it to work. And so I think there's some sort of like sabotage or like struggle. I told somebody recently, like, I know how to lead in crisis because I've been built to lead in crisis, specifically in a church context. Like I've been built to take over stuff, but I don't know how to lead in peacetime. I only know how to lead in wartime. When everything's stacked against me and I've got to do some crazy pivot. I don't know how to lead in peace.
Right.
I don't know how to lead in prosperity. Like I know how to lead in 7 years of famine, but not 7 years of plenty.
There you go.
And so there is, I think some of that scarcity mentality that makes you say, well, if God is breathing on this, I feel a little bit like an imposter when God is breathing on this. So let me run from what God is breathing on, which isn't faithful either. But it makes it seem more faithful if I keep it small.
Yeah, exactly. I kid you not, a prayer I've said multiple times a day over the past several months is be open to God's gracious abundance. Be open to God's gracious abundance. And I say it that way because I felt in me a sort of stiff arm to abundance. Like keep it at arm's length. It can't be good. Not even discerning situationally, is that particular good? If it is somehow positive, if it indicates growth, if it sort of could be viewed as successful, there must be something wrong. Just constitutionally, it cannot be good. And I think that for me, it's been part of my healing journey to accept that perfection is never the goal, but you can be healthy.
Yeah.
And when you're healthy, it doesn't always feel like a crisis. It doesn't always feel like there's a fire to put out.
Yeah.
And that is, how do you lead in peacetime?
Yeah.
How do you walk and maneuver in a situation where it doesn't feel like you're on the edge?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's part of what some of the healing that we have to do, particularly as people in a public role.
And I think I think some of the issue, so there is, I think that cynicism around it is due to a scarcity mentality. And then another is when you've been harmed by the church, it just feels different now to think about harming other people. But in a weird way, and I'm kind of deconstructing this, in a weird way, sometimes you feel like more predisposed to harming people because you went through it yourself, right? And it's almost like the self-fulfilling prophecy of, man, I feel like, how am I different from them? How am I different from him? How am I different from her? Like they were faithful, had all the right stuff. They had the good degree and they had this and they had that. And so how am I different from them? You know? And so I think sometimes it really, what you're talking about symbolizes how we have to do our own healing work.
Yes, exactly.
As leaders in our own inner work to like pay attention to our interior lives, to be able to interpret the movements of famine and lack and abundance and scarcity and prosperity. And it's just even for 10, 15 years, it just keeps growing. And I'm like, man, I'm doing everything I can do internally to watch my motives but it seems like God is breathing on this and wants it to grow.
That it's bringing me back to, was it Paul saying, I've learned the secret to
Philippians.
Exactly.
4,
So abundance and lack and all these things. There's an equilibrium that we have when we are pursuing healthiness and holistic health. So part of the
that's good.
Perspective I think we need to have on explosive growth is to take the long view. That sometimes there's explosive growth, exponential growth, just like what is happening right now. And sometimes there's ebbs, like it goes away real quick. And the tides shift. And there's a sense in which we can't make growth the thing. We can't make it so, this growth is happening, so we must have struck gold somehow and we've got to keep this going. That's actually, I don't think, should be the focus. I think the focus is still, as it should have been before and should remain, faithfulness. What does it look like to be faithful in this growth right now? And when it goes away, what does it look like to be faithful in?
That's really good. That's good. And I think, so this also crosses over. So we're talking about this from a leadership perspective, but I think this also crosses over into a followership perspective, a consumer perspective, right? Which is take the long view of the movements that you're in. And one of the things I wish I would have done differently as I was a part of exploding young Christian movements is I wish I would have been more careful with my words. I wish I would not have used superlatives or drawn really hard lines based upon what I was feeling in the moment.
Interesting.
And one of the dangers, I think, is when you're in a movement that's growing, I often talk a lot to our church about this. It is very dangerous to become kind of those set tripping, gang banging Christians. Like, it's my church, the best side of heaven.
Set tripping.
Yeah, like set tripping churchgoers. Like, it's like literally like, yo, but it's this church. We get down like this over here, and it's like, there's a healthy pride and a healthy joy of being a part of a community of believers that you feel like is family. And then there's like a really unhealthy expression of competition. And be like, we're superiority. Like, look at this. We're the only ones doing this. This is if I were telling a young person who's caught up in a movement right now, be careful about a fast growing movement. When you're caught in that, be careful about using language like we are the only ones doing this.
The best.
We are the best. Nobody else is. I would have used much more careful language, especially with my close relationships, because I realized that I hurt people by walking around as if I were greater than them, better than them, had some insight they couldn't have or they didn't have on their own. And humility is, now I look back on it and I'm a little like, I was a little duped. I was duped in some ways to think this, but it wasn't all bad.
Right.
It just wasn't everything.
And we got to, as churchgoers, as followers, as people who may be part of the explosive growth, the reason why You know, the leaders are like, yo, what's happening? We've got to know why we're coming to something and what our motives are, and to realize that not all that glitters is gold. Just because it's on and popping doesn't mean it's healthy, right? Yeah. Just because it's popular doesn't mean it's pious, if you will. Yeah. So I think some of the responsibility is on us as disciples. Yes. Like, I mean, we got to know what we're signing up for and practice discernment. Yes. Practice a sense of critical consumption, if you will, and hold our leaders to account, knowing that they have a great burden to bear. But like, again, you know, it goes back to what I was saying before. It's not all on the preacher. It's not all on the leader. It's also on the parishioner. It's also on the person in the pew, not to just join the bandwagon, right?
And I think, so 2 things I would say to that point is, number one, when you talk about taking the long game, that also means reading and consuming outside of your current moment.
Good. Yes.
So one of the great things to do is read and consume books and resources and sermons and podcasts and interviews from people who have long since passed. Yes. Or who are not in our current generation. Yes. Or who are not from our tribe, or who are not in our moment. And listening to them roots and grounds you with a different perspective of, okay, yeah, people have been saying this for years, or people have been saying something different and they were still faithful. Yeah. Because they came to a different interpretation, they were still faithful.
Can we talk about how Christians think we can really only get good stuff from other Christians?
Yo.
Like, I think that's part of it. Yikes. Dude. So part of it, we're funneled into these churches, these preachers, because we don't see value in God's common grace to speak through an atheist philosopher or another Christian who doesn't check all the same theological boxes we do. And so what we're doing is we're on a search for this pure, quote unquote, Christian content, right? And then we find ourselves on so many bandwagons because those are the only options that we've left for ourselves. You know what I mean? Like, I think part of my testimony is, I went to Reformed Theological Seminary. I learned about Reformed theology because I thought it would give me a grid that would allow me greater access to different kinds of knowledge and sources than before. I would know what I believed, and therefore I could engage more broadly. Yeah, exactly. And what happens, what I've seen, what I've observed so often is that for many people, it did the exact opposite. Yeah. Right? Like, well, this theology or this tradition or this kind of, that's the only thing I can access. So guess what? Within that narrow lane, I got to hop on this bandwagon, hop on that bandwagon, because I can't go outside these lines.
That's really good. That's really, really good. And I think also you have to beware when the movement itself, it subtly encourages you to have a more narrow view. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think there's
everything's demonic these days, Tyler.
Well, but I think there's a difference between a narrow view and the narrow road. Yeah. And I think people get those mixed up. Wow. So they think a narrow road means you look at everything through a narrow view. And I actually don't think that's the case. I think there is great beauty in maintaining faithfulness while consuming a wide variety of people who have been guided by God, or whose common grace, God's common grace, has touched them and they don't even acknowledge it, but it can bless you in their scholarship, in their work, in their, especially in specific disciplines where the pastor is not skilled.
Thank you.
I'm not skilled in that stuff. I'm not a therapist. I'm not skilled in history. I'm not skilled. I'm a pastor. I'm not skilled in the languages. That's not my gift. I'm here to pastor and guide and encourage and lead you. But if you think that I am, then you'll come to me for everything. And then that weight will crush me, or I'll take steroids to be strong enough to take it. Right? You know? Yes. I gas myself up and fail you, which leads me to my final encouragement, which I would say is this: is beware of leader idolatry. When you're in fast growing movements, beware of leader idolatry. And it has never been easier for us to idolize influencers and viral moments and viral people. And I honor the fact that there are certain people who have just been anointed for a moment, for such a time as this. And that's incredible. That's powerful. I love it. But the truth is, if they can't be critiqued without you rushing to their defense, if someone can't say, yo, it's not for me. You like, what's wrong with you? You don't like solid preaching? You don't like this? You don't like, what you mean you don't like this person? I remember some of the people I used to recommend, and a lot of people I used to recommend, it fell off. And I was, I said, man, why don't you listen to this? Oh, you don't like them? Watch. You just don't like, you don't like exegetical. You don't like expositional. You don't like this. I didn't know what those words meant back then.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't like when somebody does verse by verse. You don't like the real exposition of the scripture. What does that mean?
Right.
And maybe someone hears and is not called to that particular style or that particular expression, or they need to hear it in a different way.
It's okay.
That's all right. Stop gatekeeping them listening how God is speaking to them. Don't gatekeep that. Wow. However God is speaking to them, man, if they being faithful, let them be faithful, man. And maybe you should learn from their broadness rather than trying to narrow them down into the. And my heart for young Black Christians is that we would take a very long, humble approach to our own spiritual growth and to the growth of others. And it is quite often as a pastor, I get people ask me questions like, well, my friend is doing blank. How do I change them?
Interesting.
And I sit down and I say, I know that's not what you meant when you said it, but you can't. You're not the Holy Spirit of God. You're not Jesus Jr. Stop trying to take the cape off and work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, because somebody may be thinking the same thing about you. And I wish I would have had a lot more grace with people, because people had a lot of grace with me. Like someone asked me recently, they were like, you seem like you're a very gentle pastor. And I was like, I don't know if that's true. I said, but I try to be gentle with people because people were very gentle with me.
Amen.
And I remember that I wasn't listening to them. I remember. And still to this day, I'm like, whatever. I remember the pushback. I remember the arguments. I remember the debates I started. And people were gracious with me. And they didn't throw me away.
Yeah.
Even when I was dissing them to their face, they didn't throw me away.
Yeah.
That's the love of God.
Yeah.
And so now I'm like, let me be patient with people.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, because it was hard to be patient with you
right.
a lot of times in those early days.
I knew
but
it was coming.
Hey, here we
I heard
are.
the smirk. I saw the smirk. I was getting emotional too.
Saying,
I was getting emotional. And I saw
you used the general
smirk.
People were patient with me, and I'm sitting right across the table from you. You could just say it.
He was just, he's like, and I was
like,
here
young
it comes.
buck. He was a little young buck. I expected
Here it comes. Here it comes. Here it comes.
But hey, look at how you've grown.
Yeah. Okay. Look at you go. Well, anyway, y'all, this has been a great episode. Thank y'all so much for tuning in. Now, as always, you can support us by subscribing wherever podcasts are played. We're also on YouTube at the Pastor Mike Podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, what up? Leave us a comment. What's going on?
Shout out.
Y'all good? Subscribe. We're going to be putting stuff up every single week here on YouTube. And I hope you enjoy it. You can also support the podcast by going to patreon.com/passthemic. And as me and my big brother always say, my elder brother of many years always says, we'll see you soon on the next Pass the Mic.